So Locke was an example of these minds at work during the Enlightenment, these kind of leading members of the movement known as philosophes. These are the intellectuals kind of driving the movement, but the philosophes community also included writers, professors, journalists, statesmen. Most of them initially were men, economists, political scientists, and social reformers. They usually arose from within the nobility and the kind of emerging or developing middle class. That is not to say that they were entirely relegated to that class. There were a few examples of philosophers coming from the lower classes, but that was rather rare. They were responsible for directing Western civilization and its intellectual orientation. The epicenter for all of this, of course, began in Paris, France, but it's important to understand that the Enlightenment and the entire era is a transnational movement. That it is something that's going to affect all of Europe and even make its way overseas to heavily influence developments in the New World as well. Philosophers were most interested in wanting to apply and test their various theories under the influence of the scientific method, again, applying these principles laid out by Newton and others earlier to other areas of study and human experience outside of kind of what we would say are the hard sciences today. They advocated for freedom of expression, which was, of course, during this period of time rather outside the norm, and as a result, they regularly challenged the status quo. However, even amidst the Enlightenment and throughout the period, if there was too much pushback against the status quo, if there was too much resistance or criticism levied at the existing order, that this could bring about pretty sharp rebuke. It could result in the seizure of books, the imprisonment of intellectuals teaching and sharing their ideas, the authors that were writing and the publishers that were publishing the works of intellectuals and authors, the sellers and distributors of these texts could also face punishment as well. So philosophers often could be exiled, just simply cast out from the country, their homeland, and government was kind of really very mindful of ideas, especially more autocratic governments, and they wanted to determine what could and could not be published. To get around all of this, philosophers usually resorted to publishing under pseudonyms. They often would publish works anonymously, and they would if should they be exiled, they would publish simply from within societies that might be more friendly and open to new and various ideas. In some cases, philosophers would exile themselves, put themselves into self-exile, or even expatriate themselves to friendlier areas such as England or Holland, say, where there was less restriction on freedom of speech, as we would kind of frame it today. Some authors also sought to be more creative in the ways to try and get around censorship. So this is somewhat parallel to what the Tokugawa era and kind of social critics within that system were facing as well. Trying to basically um, criticize or use other governments or civilizations um, as kind of a cover um, that paralleled the actions of the existing government that they were actually criticizing, in order to try and get around any type of punishment or retribution exacted by the government that they were criticizing. So savvy readers would know to insert country X when they were reading about country Y. And we'll see kind of a tangible example of this in just a few moments. But for these kind of immediate purposes, you do see this parallel playing out during the Genroku period of the Tokugawa era in Japan, and here during the Enlightenment, that there are similar parallels that are taking place for social criticism to exist, and even in some cases thrive within and under the kind of prying eyes of autocratic regimes. Governments that actually banned or burned books did more to boost the sale and the popularity of those materials. People really took to pursuing what they couldn't have, or what was perceived that they couldn't have. Philosophers also were legitimately interested in disagreeing with one another in many instances. But what's unique about the Enlightenment, even though they all kind of conformed to honoring and kind of following a scientific method, the use of reason, the kind of the honest observation of results and tests of various theories, is that the end goal was to improve society or economics or science itself, the realm of learning, essentially. And so the movement benefited from all of this, and it made it more inclusive and more robust. So even though it conformed to certain standards, everybody was held to those standards, and they could contest and challenge kind of ideas all within that kind of that framework. So not everyone was kind of swimming in the same direction, if you will, but they did adhere to kind of the overarching framework within which debate would take place. Leading philosophers, well, Locke was an early example, but other philosophers included Charles de Secondat, the Baron de Montesquieu. He was a member of the French nobility, studied the classics and law, and in 1721 he wrote the Persian Letters, which was a treatise, a piece where two fictitious Persians were critiquing Persian institutions. But again, here's a perfect example of actually Persia and this Persian context actually acting as a foil for critiquing French institutions, basically the church, the French church and the French state. Montesquieu's work here called for religious toleration, called for denouncing slavery. It also used reason, or believed that reason could be used as an instrument to liberate human beings from prejudice, and also began to, as I mentioned, attack traditional standard kind of institutions of religion. In 1748, Montesquieu is going to also publish what was known as the Spirits of the Laws, which was a comparative study of governments, a foray, you might say, into the natural laws governing society itself. These were his findings basically relegated themselves to three different types: republics, in which there was a broad public element of participation, but the republics he studied, he came to the conclusion that they were usually small in scale or domain. Next, he identified monarchies as a form of government in which you have a ruling elite that could expand its influence to a medium size scale or domain. And lastly, in the kind of more autocratic extreme, you have despotism, excuse me, which is autocracy or rule by fear, usually in the hands of a single power, single person, who could dominate a larger scale or domain. Of these, Montesquieu was particularly enamored with the English model as a moderate monarchy. He was complimentary of the checks and balances that were in place between executive, legislative, and judicial branches within that system, and that this provided for the greatest freedom measured or counterbalanced with the greatest amount of security as well, public security. When translated into English in the 1750s, this treatise, Montesquieu's treatise here, had a profound effect on Americans, particularly the Americans that are going to be the cornerstones of the Revolution. Ben Franklin, James Madison, John Adams, Alexander Hamilton, and Thomas Jefferson. Another key figure in the Enlightenment movement coming out of France was that of Francois Marie Arouet, or better known as Voltaire. He was from the French middle class, and just as a side note, Voltaire actually appears in the video I've posted about Einstein's big idea. So it basically is kind of it talks about Einstein's kind of E equals mc squared equation, but it backtracks as kind of a cross section across history of the different influences that helped create the pieces that are involved in that equation. And Voltaire factors into that, especially we're talking about Emily du Châtelet, this wealthy female aristocrat. She is very close to Voltaire. She actually protects him from any type of government reprisals for his, kind of criticisms of the French government, of the French monarchy. But it's Emily who is going to be influential towards the development of Einstein's theory of relativity, but she is doing so within the framework of the Enlightenment, the European Enlightenment. And her friendship with Voltaire, her very close relationship with Voltaire, is this key enlightened figure, so that she is, both are influencing one another essentially, and you'll see that in the video. Nonetheless, Voltaire is from the French middle class. He studied a classical education, studied law, but he was most successful as a playwright. He lived in England. He was actually exiled and moved to England for 2 years, and he developed a great admiration, like Montesquieu, for English life and culture. He admired the English freedom of the press, the political freedoms that the English people enjoyed, and also religious toleration. Voltaire believed that this particular level of spiritual and religious tolerance resulted from a great diversity of religions coexisting within England, and by the time he's living in England, it's calmed down essentially. Kind of the swings back and forth have pretty much leveled out and calmed by the 18th century. He believed that this was a key element to the more reasonable and cosmopolitan lifestyle and society that was reflected and practiced in England itself. He also amplified his criticisms of French intolerance and abuses. Essentially he's saying, having been exposed to the English system and the way of life there, this made him all the more critical of the shortcomings of French society. No better example comes to mind than that of the Calas affair. This is where John Calas was a French Protestant accused of killing his own son when that son wanted to convert to Catholicism. Now remember, in France, it was a Catholic regime. It was a Catholic state, and they wanted to enforce kind of a monotheistic model, a Catholic model essentially of religious practice. Well, John Calas confessed after being tortured to the crime he was accused of, and in fact he died a short time later as a result of that torture. So it was a coerced confession. And Voltaire protested so strongly that a retrial was actually ordered. And in that retrial, the father was actually exonerated. The son had ended up committing suicide rather than being murdered by his father. So this whole tragic incident demonstrated the French society's religious problems, kind of laid them bare. The Protestant father in a predominantly Catholic country was tortured into admitting killing his own son, who sought to convert to Catholicism, and both the son and the father here are actually the victims, and the victims of the French social inflexibility, and kind of the regimented kind of existence. It's experiences like that in which Voltaire basically developed a deep distrust of faith, religious faith in particular. Instead, he sought religious enlightenment through a new approach to understanding the divine, through understanding God. And this school of kind of an intellectual's approach to the divine was known as deism. It's basically the belief in what is often referred to as a Newtonian God, a rational, mechanical creator, setting the world into motion, but not interfering with its operation and the natural laws that governed it. So oftentimes this type of entity, this God, would be seen as a watchmaker, kind of setting it in motion and just letting it run. It was believed by deists that if you could come to know God by knowing the natural laws that governed human existence in the cosmos. And so many enlightened thinkers were in fact deists. Thomas Jefferson is a perfect example in American history. Another philosopher that was lived early in the 18th century. Actually, he was born in the early 18th century. dies in 1884. This is Denis Diderot. He is the son of a skilled craftsman in France and became a freelance writer as an adult. He, as a writer, this meant that he was really rather well versed in many different subjects and languages, so he had a deep reservoir from which to draw not only inspiration but also research. His experience was valuable in composing, particularly, and editing his life's work, which was a 28-volume encyclopedia. So really, Diderot here is an example of this new attention being paid to the rise of what was known as the science of man. Today, we would describe this as the introduction of the social sciences. This came about largely also as a result, or due in large part, to David Hume, who was a Scottish philosopher living about the same period of time as Diderot. Hume studied experiences of human life in order to try and understand human nature. And he was hoping that this could be applied to, again, the social sciences, those being primarily things like economics, sociology, psychology, history. With regard to history in particular, what's kind of fascinating is that the field of history didn't become a professional field till close to the latter part of the 19th century in much of Western civilization. It was often referred to as falling within the realm of political economy or something of that nature. But the actual field of history came about a century after this time that we're primarily dealing with here in this lecture. Nonetheless, history is a social science today. As far as economic philosophy is concerned, as a kind of a more specific school of social science during this period of time, economics is really kind of gathering quite a bit of attention. This begins with Francois Quinet. He was a Frenchman, a leader of what are known as the physiocrats. These are people who studied economic laws that governed humanity. Quinet was particularly interested in and believed that land equaled wealth, and that this was the sole source of wealth. That agriculture was the only revenue, the only kind of tangible economic value that humans could engage in. What's interesting about this is that Quinet and others, as we'll just see here in just a moment, began to reject or push back against mercantilist principles. Again, that the most significant driver within the mercantilist system was money, actual coin, like gold and silver. But these mercantilist ideas, what we studied at length so far this semester, begin to be rejected. And so the concept that states dominate economies and that the state should have a controlling interest over economic activity and trade was beginning to be not only contested but outright reversed. Quinet argued that people should be free to pursue their own economic self-interests. And so a new school of thought begins to develop here. It's what's known as the laissez-faire school of thought. This was the concept of kind of a hands-off approach as far as state interests were concerned in economic matters, that you let economic laws operate as they were intended. And again, kind of this watchmaker approach. You set the economy in motion and then let it go. Another adherent to this school of thought, laissez-faire adherent, was that of Adam Smith, perhaps the most recognizable name in economics during the Enlightenment period. Adam was a Scottish philosopher. His best known work, and one of the most influential economic works still to date, is the inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. This is often abbreviated into just paraphrased as the wealth of nations. It's published in 1776. And Smith, a Scottish citizen or English citizen in Scotland, criticized the protective tariffs that were inherent within the mercantilist system. He identified labor actually as the true wealth of a nation, the true kind of economic driver. He favored limitations on government power. He believed that government should be relegated to national defense, maintenance of justice, and also maintenance of public works. And that was really it as far as government was concerned, in providing for a public good and serving public needs. He was a adherent, again, of the laissez-faire mindset, and he established the core principles actually of economic liberalism. And towards the latter part of the 18th century, laissez-faire again became the dominant economic philosophy. So mercantilism begins to just subside. It begins to really kind of lose traction and becomes less attractive to governments that were more concerned with economic prosperity. And they found that, in a paradoxical way, if the government takes their practices laissez-faire, then principles, then actually the society becomes wealthier, people do better, and also but at the same time this benefits the state as well. So it is very enticing early on during the Enlightenment itself. It gains a lot of interest and adherence in the 19th century. As we'll see, you're going to see that when you let the economy do its thing without any kind of regulation or maintenance, that you're going to have wild swings, very good, prosperous times, and utterly devastating reversals and losses of fortune and ruinous consequences for society. So there will be other kind of challenges to laissez-faire kind of mentality, as we'll see moving forward again. For now, to refocus our attention here on the kind of core elements and developments and the significance of the Enlightenment as it developed in the 18th century, you also have women beginning to participate to a greater degree. Diderot and Voltaire were advocates for equality of the sexes, but also women themselves spoke up for themselves. You'll see that with the likes of Emily du Châtelet in the documentary, but also others like Mary Astle called for equality of opportunity in education. She also called for equality within the institution of marriage also. Traditionally, women, when they married, became the property of their husbands. You may remember my mentioning the contrast between women in the Dutch social system and women in the English under Dutch law, and women living under English law as it applied to Dutch and English colonies in the New World. When I talked about the different types of early settlers and their experiences in the Mid-Atlantic region. Well, here's another example where women were, once they married, they lost a lot of their autonomy and rights as human beings. So Mary Astell and others were really kind of, again, beginning to challenge that type of conventional thought. Mary Wollstonecraft was also another key figure. She is seen and often referred to as the founder of modern European feminism. And she often pointed out the hypocrisy of inherent within the philosophes themselves. And she wrote about this in a work titled The Vindication of the Rights of Women, published in 1792. And here basically she's saying, hey, you men are talking about liberty and freedom and this kind of enlightened thought, and yet you are not, you're either don't apply those universally to include women, or you are silent on the subject of women's equality. So she took it upon herself to challenge those philosophes and kind of hold their feet to the fire, so to speak. She believed that women should have equal rights with men in the fields of economic and political life as well. So, in addition to this, the Enlightenment in European society, the actual events that took place were in they started out kind of on a small scale before kind of being more formal and opened up to a broader audiences. For all the focus again on liberty here and equality, the movement remained most popular among the aristocracy and the upper middle class. Again, these are the more literate classes, they are the more learned classes, and so therefore they're going to be able to understand the concepts involved in enlightened thought. Enlightened ideas circulated within what are known as salons, or in French, the salon. These social occasions provided an arena where you had the mixing, the congregating really, of philosophes, writers, artists, wealthy bourgeoisie, members of that class, and also government officials in some cases. And these events were hosted usually by women, the women of aristocratic households. And so as a result of this, these allowed and provided opportunities for women to influence policy and decision making, that they both could learn from these experiences but then also contribute to them. Two members in particular, I hope I get these names right, Marie Therese de Geoffrin, and also the Marquis du Defresne. They were leading members kind of within the establishment and the kind of organizing and hosting salons to and attracting leading members of the Enlightened movement to their engagements. So hopefully here, just to wrap up, this gives you both a kind of overview, but at the same time able to drill down a little bit on the details and convey some of the key figures and significant publications and events and ideas that were circulating in and around during this period of time, primarily focused on the 18th century, but understanding at all times that it really is the the 17th century pursuit of the scientific method, applying, laying the groundwork of what the scientific method was, how it could lead to, you know, a more robust and a kind of definitive, or provide more definitive conclusions through the use of human reason and observation established by the likes of Galileo and Newton, but then take that model of rational thought and understanding and apply it to the wider world of interests. This happened very quickly. That the and it had pretty dramatic consequences, rather, that were both dramatic but also again had a quick onset time. It meant that the shelf life really of theories and governing practices grew shorter in many cases, in many instances. Scientists and intellectuals continually challenged convention, but while they did so, they also challenged each other. Okay, and this is key to understanding the characteristics of what was happening in the 18th century, but also the perpetual nature of that, which we take as as an assumption today. That innovation, the proliferation of ideas, the pursuit of ideas and creativity, and so on and so forth, seems to be constant. It has been, and it continues to be today, but it traces its origins. It traces kind of its this kind of proliferation growth all the way back to the Enlightenment. So our own understanding of, again, how we approach, how we learn as human beings, how we approach social issues, it goes back to this period of time. So the I don't, you could call it a petri dish. You could kind of make it. You could call it a kind of a incubator of ideas. It was all for and to the benefit of advancing a kind of a more modern society, and that modernity revved up and amped up during this period of time, became much more rapid, and as a result it's going to quickly erode just as rapidly the status quo, and those regimes that were unable to react adequately and change with the times were the ones that were particularly susceptible. This is the case with regard to not only colonial issues in the English colonies, in the Americas, basically what will become the United States, but also, and more importantly, what happens in the French experience during the latter part of the 18th century, and precipitating those two revolutions, the American Revolution on the one hand and the French Revolution on the other. So that's what we're going to take a look at in the coming lectures. So again, hope this helps with the kind of understanding this crucial pivotal point here in world history. You can also see the parallels here between the experiences in Western Europe and also a common experience, a parallel experience happening in Tokugawa, Japan, for example. You're going to see those commonalities, those types of parallels grow stronger as the world becomes really kind of more of a uniform place as far as interactions becoming more commonplace, and as a result, experiences become more parallel, which which we'll also take a look at. All right. All right. Thanks for your time.